Hi, everyone, and welcome to the February edition of the Digital Signage Power Hour series. Today, we'll be talking about price versus cost considerations for your next digital signage project. Today's webinar is approved for one RU credit for CTS, CTSI, and CTSD. Please allow 5 to 7 business days for those RUs to appear on your transcript. And if you have any questions regarding your RUs, please email webinars@avixa.org. Today's webinar will be 45 to 60 minutes in length, and audience questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. Enter your questions into the Q&A window, which can be found by clicking the icon at the bottom of your video box. And please don't forget to introduce yourself in the chat so that we can know where everyone is joining us from today. And please keep your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat, as those do tend to get lost. If you'd missed one of our previously recorded webinars, please visit avixa.org/webinars to view all of the 2021 recordings and previous years as well. And today's webinar will be online at that same link in about 5 business days. Today's panel will be moderated by Ryan Cahoy with the DSF Board of Directors and on the Executive Committee with the Digital Signage Federation. He'll be joined by Tony Green, VP of Business Development with Snap Install, Kristen Roby, Director of Business Development with Elo Touchscreens, and Jeffrey Weitzman, Managing Director at Navori. And now, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks, Lauren. Welcome, everybody, to our panel today. We're definitely going to spend a little bit of time discussing some of the finer points around price versus cost when you're looking at digital signage. As Lauren said, my name is Ryan Cahoy with the Digital Signage Federation, and I'll act as the moderator for today's panel. Just real quick, a little bit about the DSF. We're a nonprofit organization. We're really focused on helping to elevate the digital signage industry. We work with our members to identify experts in key areas, and then we create short educational micro-credential courses that are available online. So if you're a DSF member, check it out. You do get one user with full access included with your membership. So if you have somebody that wants to brush up on some of the hot topics of today, direct view LED, mounting for video walls, ADA compliance, digital out of home, we've got about 35 to 40 courses out there, each of them about 30 minutes in length. So definitely check those out. Another thing at the DSF is we do regional meet and greets, and we are planning this year to try to get back to normal. The last couple of years have been spotty at best. We did hold our first event a while back in December in Atlanta, and it was very well received. So right now we're targeting in May in Chicago, in August in Minneapolis, and in November in Dallas. So watch our site for details as that gets closer. We definitely love everybody to join us, get out, mingle with the industry, talk up digital signage with your colleagues. Last year was great for us at the DSF as we started our partnership with Avixa, creating these D-Sign educational programs. And I'm really proud to say that we're in full planning for extending that into 2022. So we're going to do 8 online panel discussions, this being the first. So stay tuned to Avixa for the schedule over the course of the year of these 8 different panel discussions. And then we're going to hold 8 live sessions at InfoComm. So if you're planning to go, you want to get immersed in digital signage, we've got some really good targeted topics over a 2-day track coming up in June. So stay tuned for that as you sign up for InfoComm. So with that, I want to start to engage with our panel here, Tony, Kristen, and Jeffrey. And I'll have each one of you guys introduce yourself here in just a second. But before then, I want to officially welcome you guys to the DSF board. I know each of you, along with Brian Mazeros, were elected by your peers this last December. So you're the next generation carrying the DSF forward into whatever the new normal will be. So welcome to the board. This is a great kicking off. One last housekeeping note, we do want this to be a lively and active conversation. So if you got any questions, as Lauren mentioned, there's a Q&A box. Just drop your questions in there. I'll watch it as we go through, inject those questions. We got plenty of time saved at the end. So don't be shy. Hit us with your questions. It'll make for a lot more fun conversation. So with that, I'll start with you, Kristen, if you want to really briefly introduce yourself and your company.
Absolutely. Hi, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be part of the DSF board these days. My name is Kristen Robay, and I'm currently the Director of Business Development for focusing on interactive digital signage, Pro AV, and mobility at ELO Touch Solutions. I've been in the digital signage industry for 18 years. Prior to coming to the manufacturer side, I was on the system integration side. So I have seen multiple sides of this business and worked with many of my counterparts on the board as well as in the industry.
Great. Same question to you, Tony, if you want to quickly introduce Snap and introduce yourself.
Absolutely, and thanks again for everyone registering today. We're excited to talk about this interesting topic. Again, my name is Tony Green. I'm the VP of Business Development here at Snap Install. We are a nationwide service provider, specializing in a lot of those digital signage projects that a lot of you are very familiar with. In regards to my industry experience, I've been a volunteer on the education committee for 3-4 years now. Excited to be a co-board member for the education committee as well and continue down that path. Snap has been involved in digital signage industry for 5+ years now, along with being in the service industry for over 10 years.
Great. Last but not least, Jeffrey, if you want to introduce Navori and yourself.
Certainly. So Jeffrey Weitzman, been in the digital signage space for about 12 years now, going on 13. So a good stretch. Navori is a software engineering company focused mainly on digital signage software. Also more recently on computer vision analytics. So I'll be coming at most questions from that perspective. We're about 25 years in business. I would say we have a pretty good global presence, over 1 million endpoints deployed. So that's the Coles notes for those of you who don't know us. Also a new board member, so focused. I'm actually co-chairing the membership committee. So anyone who's online, if you're not a member of the DSF, now is a good time.
Excellent, great plug. So as you guys can see, we got a really well-rounded, we've got bases covered from hardware, from software, from services. So we'll kind of jump into things here. And again, questions are welcome, so fire those in. Kristen, I'll start with you. Let's come at it from the hardware side first. Obviously there's a huge range in cost when I go look at a commercial TV or a consumer TV at Best Buy, then when I look at a top-end, high-end commercial screen. Any advice on whether I'm a reseller integrator or I'm an end user and I'm starting to look at this, how do I navigate these choices, and does it vary from industry to industry? What's your advice?
Yeah, so there's a lot to take into consideration, but one thing that I wanted to mention first is the purpose of digital signage. And the reason why screens are being put out there is to either engage with whether it is a end user facing or an internal organization facing. You're looking to engage, communicate, inform and educate, or promote and sell. And that's the reason why it's out there. So first and foremost, you want to make sure it's running and it is engaging content. It is, in your face, the best quality that it can, because it comes down to that whole 2-second rule. You have 2 seconds to grab people's attention, and then you have about 20 seconds to hold it. So making sure that your hardware and your technology and content and everything is up and running is imperative. And in today's world, when we're surrounded by technology, it's really easy for us all to think we're experts, and you get really comfortable and confident. And it's really appealing to say, I just bought that smart TV at Costco for $500. It looks like it has a integrated signage player, great picture, perfect, let's roll that out. But as I'm sure most of us here know, a home environment versus a commercial environment are very different. And so you need to take different things into consideration. And a few things that are extremely important to take into consideration that are different between consumer and commercial grade are things like the operating time. So when you think about watching the TV or something at your home, it is entertainment purposes. You have it maybe on from 1 to 3 hours a day, unless you have the news in the background, but it's not 24/7, 365. And that's what we generally need in an enterprise circumstance, because if you think about it, no matter what, when you leave, if you're walking by a store or an office building, there's often lights, computer screens, digital displays that are still up and running. So the lifespan of that and the operating time is extremely important. If you're in public environments, you want it to be tamper-proof construction. So you don't want buttons on the front. You want to make sure that it has that commercial mounting. So you have secure mounting capabilities. You also want commercial connectivity because you don't want someone to be able to go up and just pull an HDMI cable when you're dealing with commercial players and commercial displays. You have multiple connectivity where you want to be able to screw that on or at least cover the cable connections with a secure plate. That's something that is really important. Another thing to take into consideration is long product life cycles and form factors. So when you go into a bar and you're sitting there watching TV, how often is it that, the screens that are, overall the liquor are 7 different types. So they have different resolutions, different form factors, different shapes. So when you go to the commercial side, the form factors are generally simple. They're not branded and they have those long life cycles. So if you start a deployment, if we're talking to, a large hospitality or retail brand right now, you guys have, hundreds to thousands of locations, and we all know no one has that much capital expenditure. So that is going to be a longer rollout, and you want to be able to roll out the same product throughout that. So when it comes to support and content, you have that same functionality, the same experience across your brand. You also want to have that external control capability. So when you're talking with your software partner, even like your player, you want to be able to make sure that when screens are up and when they're down, because when they're down, it's important to understand is that down because there's something wrong with the content, there's something wrong with the network, the screen's down, and do I need to dispatch a technician? Do I need to call the manager on site? And having those alerts are very imperative. Also is the warranty and extended service programs. And I know Tony will get into this probably in more detail, but a lot of times when you are utilizing a consumer screen in a commercial environment, there is those little notes within the warranty statement that if being used in a commercial environment, the warranty is only valid for 30 days. So when you're working with a commercial screen, you're generally getting a 3-year warranty, extendable up to 5 years. And again, this goes down to that runtime. The whole reason why you implemented a digital signage program is to be up and communicating at all times. So you want to make sure that there's a quick turn on that service and you're protected. Another thing that I did want to mention was the auto power on functionality. That is something that often isn't thought about when you are talking about a commercial installation. And if you think about a big, broad digital signage network, some screens can be up very high, some are in an environment that's unmanned. If the power gets shut down, so there are some stores that they shut the entire power down at the end of the day, or there's a power outage of some sort. If there's no one there to intervene, or you don't have that auto power on functionality, you're either getting a blue screen, no screen, content's not playing. There's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration on both the display and the player side for that. When it comes to environmental considerations, if you're going into a kitchen, so kitchen automation displays, HR type displays that are in that type of environment, IP rating, operating temperatures are extremely important. If you're utilizing touch technology, you need to understand that environment. Is it something where there's going to be a lot of debris? So think of a home improvement store where it's a really big dusty environment. You want to make sure that you don't have a bezel because that's where the touch technology lives. And if there's artifacts in there, you're not going to get accurate touches. So you'll want to be edge to edge glass. And, lastly, if you're in somewhere like a car dealership where there is a lot of windows, it's a very bright environment, you want to make sure that you're utilizing high bright screens because you want everybody, no matter what time of day or where they are within the facility, to have the same experience. So with that, I'll pass it on to Tony and Jeff.
All good points there. Good segue, Tony. She mentioned the if it burns in or it fails and I put a consumer screen in, the level of support. What's your kind of quick take on supporting those consumer devices when they show up out in the environment?
Yeah, that's as Kristen mentioned, she had a lot of great points. Thank you for all that. Really, as you look at it, and you mentioned a few of those topics, it's really about supporting and protecting that investment, right? Whether you are going to go to that consumer grade or go with that commercial grade, that initial shock might be less if you're going consumer, but truthfully, in the long run, and Jeff mentioned it in some of our pre-calls, free is not free, right? Those initial costs, they can really add up over time. If we go out to that, say, consumer grade TV and a commercial application, as Kristen mentioned, that warranty is null and void. Really, our only option or solution at that point is, unfortunately, you're going to need to buy a new screen, right? And especially this ecosystem, something that I've really loved over the past 5+ years is the support within this environment or this ecosystem. One of the great terms we love saying, it really has built around that. And the fact that, we can go out on site for a service call for, say, Navori, right? We've got issues out there. We need to figure out what's going on. It could be network, could be something to do with the display. Having that ability to call Jeff and his team or call that manufacturer and call ELO, right? Call Kristen and say, here's the issues we're experiencing. That really helps come up with that end solution of what do we need to do to fix this, but keep those costs down, right? I mean, that's the big answer here is how do we keep those costs down, but still protect that investment? And sometimes that means spending more on the front end. Also, as you look at, services and you look at the brackets, you look at enclosures, kiosks, really anything out in the industry, if you really cut corners on that and you look at really, less expensive designs or consumer grade brackets that are out there, truth be told, sometimes that installation cost can be more expensive. Some of these less expensive mounts that are out there that I'm sure we're all familiar with, it could take me a long time just to assemble it. Where if you go with a commercial grade, mount or kiosk, those things are built pretty well and they're pre-built knowing that the installers need to be quick out there. Right? Time is always money, and that's something that we always have to focus on, especially whether it's a service call or that initial deployment.
That's great. So Jeffrey, I know we'll touch software in a little bit, but
Yeah.
From your perspective, when you're looking at the hardware side of things, do you cringe when a client tells you they want to use a low-cost consumer? Or, how do you kind of help navigate this?
It's a mixed bag. Yeah, sure. There's some cringing, but I think my co-panelists here brought up some really interesting points. If I just look at what Tony just said, and he quoted me from the earlier part, which is, it's free is not free, and it's really about all the hidden costs. It's what you don't see, and what you save when you skim money buying product on the capital side, you often make up for it on the operation side in time. So Tony brought up a perfect example. You may save some dollars buying a mount that's less expensive, but you may pay that premium in the time it takes to assemble it. So it kind of all comes into a full circle, which when I look at even just this panel, you've got different components. You've got the break fix component, you've got the display component, you've got the software component. So you can look at a TCO on each component of a solution, and then you could look at the TCO of the solution as a whole. And really how those parts and pieces gel together is what's going to create a cost-effective and efficient deployment. Kristen brought up a point about external controls. If you go with a consumer display, you're not going to give the software the same capability to monitor that hardware and grab information from the display so it can communicate, so we can actually give you a UI where you could visualize and know the status of what's happening in the field. Now, if I'm managing a large rollout, that's critical. And the cost of paying Tony to go to every site anytime a screen is down because I have no communication with the panel because I saved $200 per display even, I'm going to make up for that within 12 months and then some. So if you look at life cycle, and I think a lot of what we've been talking about is really life cycle, on a 5-year life cycle of a solution being deployed, you're going to make up for any excess capital to buy good products and services 10x by going with something reliable. That doesn't mean you have to go with the most expensive. There's an underlying principle that every time you think you're saving or you found a shortcut, it's the same thing as anything else in life. There aren't really shortcuts. They're not real. It's you get what you pay for, and there's a reason we all make a living selling professional products and services in this category.
That's a good point too, Jeff. Even if you look at the network side of things, if they're even going to cut corners on the back end with network and say they've already got Wi-Fi, they're going to look at it and say, well, I got this, it'll work. they don't do that checking, the first people they're going to blame is Navori, right? Oh, your software's not working. Well, that goes back to the planning and discussions and the initial steps is, well, what content do you want to play? Let's talk about 3G going away. And do you have, do you want to create a hotspot? Do we create a new network for you? Do you want hardline? So, even things on the structure side that can affect, really all of our positions and our product.
So let's talk a little bit more about that total cost of ownership that Jeff touched on there. So Tony, if they're talking to you about the ongoing service and the life cycle of stuff, and they say, hey, we're going to use a more economical product up front, how do you advise them how they should plan for budgeting over time to cover the service side of that?
A lot of it goes into some of that historical data. It's always, if they already have an existing network, a lot of those conversations are, what is the volume of service calls you're seeing, right? Let's get to the root of the problem. Why are you swapping out 20 screens a month, right? Let's look at that. Let's look at what monitor you have. If they're looking at the network and say the network's going down constantly, usually it's a power cycle of a player, right? A lot of that really goes into that conversation. And we do our best at Snap. A lot of the times we come in at the back end of these solutions. But obviously with a lot of great partners, we're able to make that connection, right? And that's truthfully why I love the DSF, is if there are issues and things that I can't provide them, there's always that next expert where I can say, you know what, if you're not going to listen to me on this, there might be other people that can speak higher on it, right? To really give you that background and give you those real life experiences.
So Kristen, kind of same question to you. How do you advise people budgeting, after that initial purchase, if they're looking at going lower cost on any component? It doesn't just have to be hardware. It could be really anything. Do you give them any advice on where they should really account for planning to maybe expend more in the future?
Yeah, definitely there are going to be additional costs on that service warranty. So, the feet on the street, so the labor that is going out there, and the replacement costs. And so part of the question when talking about this is, how long do you expect this network to be out there? Is it just a, hang and bang, it's going to be out there for, 6 months, 9 months? Then maybe it's a different, line of questioning and or advice. But if it's something that you want to have that total cost of ownership, the return on investment be over a 3, 5, 10-year life cycle, then understanding when things start to break and components start to break, what are those components? What freight is going to be associated with the shipping back and forth? So do you need that extended warranty that includes freight? Do you have an extended service program with, labor providers such as Snap? There's a lot to consider when it comes to, that long-term maintenance of the network and making sure that things are up and running. Having someone deployed out to fix a screen, people are expensive. So, investing up front in whether it's an extended warranty, a higher quality life cycle type product, or even a service and maintenance plan that makes sure, and they have, annually are going around and making sure that everything's up and running. One thing that I wanted to chime in when Tony was speaking, we mentioned mounts a few times, and I, from my previous life, have a interesting story when customers tried to go cheaper. And this is a large hospitality brand that really needs people in their seats to make money. And they skimped on some labor as well as the mounting hardware. And they had several locations where the screens fell off the wall, and some of it even hit some of their patrons, which insurance as well as brand, that is huge cost right there that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, huge liability. So Jeffrey, kind of pivoting, looking more at the software, there's free options. You'll hear people say, well, I can just put PowerPoint on it. And then there's enterprise grade solutions. When you start that conversation with somebody, where's a good place for them to look? Like, what's a good starting point?
It's a good question. And it also varies based on who you're talking to. If I'm having a conversation with an end user, I'll take one perspective. If I'm talking to an integrator or reseller, you may look at it from another perspective. And then also the size of the project is a factor too, and what you would or would not consider and also reasons why you would or would not pay a premium to have a professional solution versus something more entry level. So for example, if we were to take, let's start with a reseller who's looking to offer a product to a end user, and it was a relatively small deployment, let's say up to 50 screens or 1 to 10, 1 to 25 screens. Ultimately, there are solutions that claim to be free, but it goes back to what we said before. What is free and what are those hidden costs? So it's a question of what content can it support? Will it actually meet their needs, not just today, but after their marketing team develops more of a plan and they want to go from playing full screen content to split screen content. Now they want to integrate sales statistics and pull data from an existing backend and then automate that process so they're not manually typing it into a spreadsheet. It's about what are the actual objectives you're trying to achieve when you deploy the signage? And will the free solution allow me to meet them where I'm not constantly spending time in the product? So a good digital signage software or a good software is a software that saves you time and creates automation, not one that creates a new project and a new task for you to be in every day managing. And if you start to think of it that way, you'll think of your return on investment differently, and you'll be actually less pulled towards that less expensive product because you'll be assessing it with a different eye. And if I'm in a position where I'm recommending a technology to a potential customer of mine, I want to make sure that I'm recommending a technology that's going to make me look good after I've recommended that product, that the client's going to use and can use for 5 to 7 to 10 years. And so the company's reliable, they're stable. And I think there's a common theme that everybody touched on. It's support. It's what happens when there actually is some problem or question or the customer needs support in some fashion. You need to be working with a company that has infrastructure, that has staff, and that is able to handle those requests and that is familiar with the types of questions you might have. As ultimately that defines your experience. And if at a certain point, it's almost not worth having signage if you're not going to have a solution that meets your original objective, or that's going to fail to meet your objective without you investing significant time, which in fact costs money. And that's the whole premise of what we're saying. It's what you save in product, you make up for in time in terms of expenditures. So from a software point of view, that would be on a smaller project. On a bigger one, the paradigm shifts a little bit. So we talked about monitoring capabilities, knowing the status in real time about what's happening, analytics capabilities. We're seeing a big trend with analytics, whether it's AI based or sensors or, computer vision, being able to understand the actual impact of each content and measure it. So this is extremely valuable for any organization. Data science and business intelligence is a huge trend. So anything that can feed that and provide more relevant information about a network and about the efficacy of the deployment can help it scale or help you adjust it to make it give you a better return. So these things become extremely important and valuable. So there's a lot of considerations on cost that can justify spending more on something like CMS. And you would be surprised at how fast I've seen projects that deployed on an inexpensive solution, and within 1 year to a year and a half, they come back and they're saying, well, we're ready to relook at it. And that's despite the large OpEx of having to convert the existing 400 sites they already put on the other product. Because now they see the savings because they're seeing every day how much it's costing them to roll a truck or to send someone to a restaurant or to a retail store or to a facility that's not near a major metropolitan city. So the cost of getting someone there, and Tony could probably speak to that better than I can, but we see that every day because believe me, they call software support and they probably call hardware support before they say, okay, yeah, let's roll a truck. So they kind of run through the paces. So yeah, from a general point of view, that would be my perspective.
Okay. So Tony, just kind of from your perspective, when you're out helping install something and the client's opted for PowerPoint or a free software, how do you help navigate that? How do you help them realize, there's some other options that are out there?
Yeah, and Jeff had great points. And I think the big thing to think about here and kind of a key term is consistency. You want to have that consistency, whether it is, 5,000 screens across the US or, even having 3 or 4 screens within one building, right? That consistency of, lower end software with less capabilities. A lot of the times what you run into is I've got to individually change that content on each screen, right? I'm not able to remote in. I can't identify one person as a role. You now might have to have 4 different people at 4 different locations doing that and making sure they're doing it at the same time, or even within the same building, right? It defeats the purpose of digital signage that at one click of a button, I can change that price on that menu. I can change that corporate communication. I can change that ad. And also that remote monitoring, right? That's huge, especially as we look at digital out of home and that ad space that we're really starting to see a big push on. If that advertiser doesn't know when and where that content's playing because they wanted to use a less expensive solution, you now have to spend money to send teams like me out to go look at it for you, right? We've been paid to go out and take videos to say what content is on there right now. Why is it not working? Or on the service level, we might have to go out and troubleshoot 3 different screens 3 different ways, right? Some people like to mix and match different products and try out different solutions, which is great on pilots, but it's not sustainable. It's not scalable, right? You really want to have that consistency start to finish. And you want to be able to say whether I'm going to pay someone that offers that remote support that isn't added on and it's a value, right? Or do I want to assign one person and that same message is getting out, whether it's your customers, your employees, or whoever it might be, right?
Yep. So Kristen, I know you've probably got unique perspective here, just given you guys have a software developer program, and you've probably worked with some big brands that did it themselves with just Android and started out. Is there a point where you've had conversations with them and they went, man, this was a lot more than we expected. Now we need to kind of graduate into something else? Or I guess what's kind of your observations with people as they started something homegrown and then realized what it was really like?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing to clarify, we don't have the program where we can build content. It's just to deploy content. So often we are working with those people who are either working with a third party CMS company, or they have something that's homegrown. And something that's homegrown versus a commercial grade purpose-built CMS is generally a one-trick pony. It is very specifically purpose-built. And what I always recommend, and where you see, money being spent a lot to build this particular piece of content or this particular, station, then, other departments want to get into it. They're seeing the success. And so I believe, Tony and Jeff both said it is, scalability. So when I am talking to end users and or, VAR partners, one of the things that I always recommend when looking for a digital signage software partner is looking for someone who has a platform or an organization that has a platform, because generally within the platform, you get a lot more capabilities. You often have, as Jeff mentioned, a team behind that program that can assist you in building it. And it allows you to have multiple purposes for your content. You have end user facing content, you have associate facing content. Tony mentioned, that automation, and you can do a lot more within a single platform, and generally that allows you to get a higher ROI.
So,
Okay.
and I would
ahead,
like to
Jeff.
add to that if I can, Ryan. So I think Kristen brought up some really great points. And when you think of a CMS and you think of basic versus professional, you go beyond just content management. So when you think of the word platform, there's several layers to that. So there's content management, there's device management and monitoring, there's user management. So in larger networks, you have multiple contributors who have different roles. So there's an entire section dedicated to managing just the people that need to log in and have an access, but not a full access, or need to get certain notifications that others don't. That's often a category of the CMS that doesn't even get looked at when you just present the GUI and say, hey, look, I could add an RSS feed in a video, so I do the same thing as somebody else. It's really not equal until you've experienced the need for it. And the challenge we have in our industry is people who deploy networks quickly or without proper planning often don't realize they had that need until they experience the pain, and then they circle back. And we see that a lot. That's extremely common. And through time, it's actually increasing more and more, not less and less. So we kind of got to get in front of that trend. I'm not sure if Tony or Kristen, you see the same thing, but that happens a lot on our side. Same thing with integrations. You know, you'll purchase a product thinking it does everything you need right now, but then I need to integrate it. You know, if I'm a QSR, I need to integrate my order confirmation screen, or if my POS system, or if I'm a call center, I got to get my call center stats onto the screen. And you know, for one system that might be you know, 1 hour of work and just to port the data from A to B. And another system, you may have to do a full custom HTML development that's outside the CMS, and then just render that HTML where the CMS is just a playback engine. So the word platform has a lot of meaning there. And you need to think about not just right now, but all the different parts and components you want from that platform, and all the different cost centers that could add up over time if you don't go with a solution that's capable of meeting the 360 of requirements.
Gotcha.
So I'm just going to say, Jeff, thank you for completing my sentence, because that's totally what I was going to say when I said that. No, I'm teasing. You said it way better than I ever could. But yeah, to your point, one of the things that I just wanted to expand on is the fact that you are seeing more and more people coming back and seeing more need for multiple use cases. Personally, I have seen our growth as an organization. It's coming from the same customers, but for different use cases, getting in deeper and wider within those organizations, rather than it being net new customers. So those use cases are evolving and changing, and something that was, you know, very specific purpose, you know, driven to sell a specific product is now helping people check out, find a size, communicate health standards and cleaning. It's just everything is evolving and it's happening quicker and quicker. So making sure that you are set up on the front end to handle all those changes is extremely important.
Yep, and I'll go one step further and say end users have gotten smarter than ever before, and that's a wonderful thing for technology companies that pride themselves on sophistication that sometimes don't matter if all you want to do is roll full screen content in a loop with no logic. But what I find has been interesting with larger networks and larger retailers or QSRs, or even in CorpCom, automation has become more important. So you know, the term open architecture and actually having a robust API stack where you could think of the solution as being almost headless, where the user interface is completely secondary. You could do so much with that if you're not stuck clicking and dragging and dropping. Now, although you know, a general user, when you present a solution, you think of a CMS as just what's the UI and user experience. But what's really behind the CMS is what are the functionalities and how can I access those so I could do it 1,000 times with one push? And that also is what makes the difference. So when you want to incorporate a CMS into an existing infrastructure, the set of functionality and the questions you're going to ask shift completely again as well. So, and that's more for an enterprise stake, but
I think that lines up with the question that came in. So the question is, you know, what resources are out there to find CMS solutions that are entry level versus expert level? Any of you guys run across anything that's good for somebody coming out doing research? Jeffrey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I could say that our solution to it was because we saw that all the time, and we actually see people kind of slowly grow. So, and it kind of segues from my last conversation. We actually created different versions of our user interface so that we can adjust to the user. So it's actually the same backend with different flavors of the UI. So I have a Express standard view, which is stripped of a lot of the more robust functionality that you may not need, which simplifies the process. You could probably learn how to get content on the screen in 5 minutes and have it running. So that solves, you know, if I'm entry level, it's perfect, and you'll charge less for a solution like that. But then you can graduate into something more robust by just upgrading and making that process simple. So when you start looking, you want to think, again, it's also about life cycle. Just because you want entry level now, you may not need entry level in 1 year. So you want to find something where you don't have to rip out all your hardware after or retrain a staff. goes back to those hidden costs. How much time would I need to invest if I don't pick the right one now?
Gotcha. Kristen, have you seen any good comparisons of the different software entry versus enterprise out there?
You know what, it's one of the things that I would recommend is working with some of your manufacturer partners. Because there's some things that we don't want to put out there because we have several partners within the CMS space, but internally, so that we understand and can point our customers in the right partner direction, we have some internal matrices that's, kind of go over what vertical the CMSs are specializing in, how sophisticated the system is, what costs are associated with it. Is it something that, is a platform, so there's, a relatively higher monthly fee, or are you just picking and pulling at different types of assets? So I would say lean on some of your partners as well, because often we have customers that are going to be similar to you and what you're looking to accomplish. And we can recommend, we'll never tell you this is who you need to go to. We will say, based on what you're looking for, these are the 3 software partners or CMS partners that I would recommend you speak to, and here are a few contacts. So that's one thing that I would recommend, because there is no one size fits all, and having that communication is extremely important. Having a spreadsheet of it is, difficult to assess. There's not the feeling and the emotion behind it where, of course, everyone can say they work with every vertical and they can do everything. Everyone has experiences that are different.
Yep. Tony, anything jump out at you want to share?
Yeah, I think really even identifying, like Jeff mentioned, you can break down layers, but I think really truly identifying what is your definition of entry level versus expertise, right? What does that really look like? And that's something you should really think about. And to pitch a little bit with the DSF, and if you're not a member, again, join. Part of the education committee, some of these education and micro credentials we have, there is a lot of great information on how to select the right CMS, and even down to, how does this install work? What's the right screen for this application? How do I even start digital signage? So truthfully, the DSF, one of the best things I found with it is really about that networking ability, like Kristen mentioned. Use your resources, talk to people, ask questions. Just because you want to do digital signage today doesn't mean it has to be deployed tomorrow, right? It's really about doing cost evaluations, and really everything we're talking about today, not to get too cliche, is we're really comparing apples to apples versus apples to oranges right now. I think that old saying really fits well with this, is what do you really want versus what do you need? And I think a lot of that goes back to that old saying. So
Yeah.
And just to expand on the DSF side, there is a couple of courses on selecting a digital signage CMS. So again, as Tony mentioned, for members, that's a good resource to check out. Sorry, Jeffrey, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking when Tony was talking, it's the term entry level, if you start to think about that a little bit further, and I think about one of the things that I commonly hear when people describe what are the advantages of my CMS, or what makes your CMS better than mine, or number one, to everything we've said, it's all within a certain context. There's no universal truth, and I think that's an important point. Kristen said no one's the best at everything, and nobody could do absolutely everything for everyone. That is probably the only universal truth that we could state here. But entry level or not entry level, and I go back, the statement that everybody will say is, I have an easy software, it's easy to use. So often when you think of entry level, you think of how easy is it to use. But most CMSs have a UI and a workflow that's relatively simple, and that if you take the time, you'll understand it, and they can get content on a screen. So I think the better thing to look at is reliability. When you put something out in the field on a screen, you want it to play consistently and for a long time without having to touch it. So it's really about stability and reliability. And entry level or pro, you want the same thing. You want your endpoint to play its content and do so without you having to intervene. So you want to go with a product that's proven, that's stable, and it all comes full circle to something you could program once and that you don't need to go into every single day. And I think that's important.
Well, one thing, just to add a little context to that, is I think the other thing that's important is the context of your market segment. So, a digital signage CMS may say, we're really simple, But if I'm a movie theater and it's important to pull stuff out of a point of sale, their simple and my simple may not match up. So I think a very important thing when you're looking for what CMSs to align with or to interview is, do they work with customers like me? And if they do, that's a really good telltale of they understand your market and your needs and what's easy for you. So just a thought there.
Yeah, and to play off that, Ryan, I will say, at the DSF meet and greet, you will find like organizations similar to yourself. So that's another place to network where you're not going there for something industry specific, where you're potentially looking at each other as competition. It's a very community type environment where everyone's looking to learn and grow from each other.
Yep. Okay, so we're starting to get towards the tail end. So I just want to, again, encourage everybody to throw their questions in so that we make sure and cover all your questions before we wrap up here in 10 minutes or so. I know we've been talking about hardware and software, but Tony, I want to just kind of hit your sweet spot a little bit with the services side of things. Should a user just save the cost and install it themselves? Why hire a professional to do it?
Like everything else, they can. But truthfully, having that expertise, like everyone here on this call today, this is really what we specialize in. I think that really gives that peace of mind, especially with the investment. It is an additional cost, but depending on if you're an end user versus integrator or reseller, it is also a value add, and it is an additional resource or additional way to really upcharge that service. But there's a reason for it. We run into a lot of people want to call someone locally. You're always going to be able to find someone cheaper, right? That's just something you can always do, and that's a lot of what we've talked about today. But one of the key things, especially with Snap, is we're going to be here. We're going to answer that phone. As we talked about support on the ELO side and warranty, we talked about support on the Navori side. That same thing goes with that services, and having someone that can get there fast, someone that can get there and take care of the issue, provide you resources, or even provide information back to your partners to say, here's what we found, right? You might call that guy tomorrow, but he might not answer the phone, right? Even just having little things like insurance. That's an incredible thing that a lot of people out in that field, they can do work tomorrow without any experience, without any insurance, without any protection, right? And that can cause value and that can cause costs. I always like to leave this on a quick thing that I've always said to people, but and something I want to hear from you guys on, but good, fast, and cheap, you get to pick two, right? And that again goes back into that cost versus price versus value, and it's really something to think about. And not that any answer is right or wrong, but it's also important to what you want, what you need, what's part of that cost evaluation. If you're not worried about expenses 2 years down the road, but you have the money to do it now, but less expensive, it's okay, do it, but at least know what's coming after that, right? So.
Yep. So are there ways to still spend money and get professional products, but save on cost? Like, are there things that people should be thinking about, like integrated media players? Jeff, you mentioned automated content. Are there things where by spending a little bit more in one area, you can save in other areas? Jeff, I'll let you take the first kick at this.
For sure. I think you mentioned integrated media players. If you look at capital when you're rolling out a big network, obviously, a media player or the display and are big parts of that. Kristen, if you look at ELO displays, they can have an integrated Windows or an Android device. And if you could take advantage of that, you could save having to have an external device, but it's not just the cost of that device, it's where do you mount it, where you're going to place it. And it's another additional exposed point that can fail that Tony may have to roll a truck to go to. So, everything is full circle and becomes a cost. So one thing that we looked at is we try to be compatible with as many different hardware platforms as our customers are using. Like, for example, today, if I look at rollouts, I have so many that are on Windows, but also more than ever on Android or on Tizen or WebOS or a flavor of Linux, so or BrightSign OS, which is extremely popular. So you've got all of these different systems that can be deployed. So I think being able to have a system that lets you take advantage of them and use the right one when it's the right solution based off the content and the environment it's going into is going to be a major cost saver over time. A lot of end users end up having multiple networks and are now trying to actually consolidate them onto one back-end system because they're actually running multiple CMSs within the environment. And that's happened through acquisition, and not necessarily, it's more by happen so than by strategy, but it's a reality. And now the strategy comes together where they're saying, what are we doing operationally? We're drowning. Why are we managing so many different systems? So a good platform that can consolidate that can save a ton of money.
Kristen, Tony, either of you guys have anything to add in terms of places where you can see people could maybe increase their investment on something and it helps save in other areas?
I think it's about efficiencies. Goes back to the scalability and consistency. You really want to find, even, as you look at screen manufactured, right? If you're able to buy 5,000 screens, they're usually able to work in that price versus buying 100, right? That buying power is something that's real in the industry and something to think about. That maybe if you're not ready for a big deployment today, start small or save that and look at when can you do that bigger deployment. That can save you a lot of money on that front end while still using that high-end product. It kind of goes back into the services side of things. With that consistency and scalability, you're going to get that consistency across the board with the same team and same information over and over, and having that expertise of saying, in this application, this might work better. Let's do a pilot. Let's look at surveys. So I think truthfully, before you make that big investments, I always recommend pilots. That's going to really come back to, what do you really want? Is this going to work? Is it what you want? Before you write that big check in the end.
Kristen, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, these guys hit on the great points. I will just say a few words. It's pulling from both of them, but what I think is where you can save money, spend money, goes down to that consolidation. Make sure you are limiting, the partners, the amount of places where you have to log on, the compatibility, making sure who you choose, whether it's software or hardware, is compatible with a wide variety of partners, and the efficiencies. So I think those are kind of the 3 points that you need to look at where you're making when you're making decisions.
Okay. A question that came in, this might be in your wheelhouse, Tony. You said they're having to deal with 46-inch video wall products leaving the market. Is there specifically a form fit replacement or any thoughts on an approach dealing with that?
I think like everything else in this industry, the big saying now is bigger is better, and brighter. I would say 46-inch video walls have been not as normal these days. I think a really standard size screen is 55-inch. Also, there's great solutions. Elo has some of them, but large format screens, right? You've got a lot of the touch screens up there for, say, educational purposes, where they are making them 80, 98-inch, right? Some are even over 100 now. But also looking at other options and solutions, right? If you're looking at budgets, and costs are starting to come down on it, but a really popular item right now is the DV LED aspect, right? Those really big, giant, massive walls that have zero bezels. But again, it goes in the application. So
yeah, I think their question was specifically about replacements for existing stuff that's out there. So it sounds like, you're really, if I've got a big video wall and the screen goes out in the middle, I got to evaluate my whole solution at this point.
I mean, first thing you want to look to see if you can replace that one, but otherwise, yeah, what a lot of people are doing are full on pulling those old screens out. They can use those other screens that are working in other applications throughout the building, but what I have seen is people are upgrading when they have that reason to.
Just curious, Kristen, from your perspective, is there something that changed with 46-inch glass that is creating complexity, or is it just a cost thing?
If you can find some stock anywhere, if you have 46-inch video walls that are in the market, kind of bring in a few products to have for, somewhat of a rotation program. But, where we transition, our 46s over to 50s, because that's where the glass efficiencies are today. But, to Tony's point, depending on how big it is, a lot of people are upgrading to just one larger screen. And then repurposing and reusing those components of the video wall in other applications. Yeah, the 46, when I saw that question come up, I was like, that's a tough one.
Good luck.
Okay, well, we're kind of drawn to the close here the last few minutes. So just wanted to go quick round robin for closing thoughts. So, we covered a lot of ground here. I'll start with you, Kristen, but just over the last hour, what are some of the key takeaways you'd like the audience to walk away with from this panel discussion?
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to say is utilize the resources that are available to you between the DSF and Avixa. It's a great pool of resources and information regarding anything that we've talked about today. But when it comes to price versus cost, I think, you know, where the three of us have really hammered down on, I hope at least, is that upfront price does not equal the overall total cost of ownership, and making the proper investments on the front end and taking in, you know, long life cycles and what you're potentially doing in the future into considerations up front will end up costing you less.
Same question to you, Jeffrey. Closing thoughts, key takeaways?
I think Kristen did a great job at summarizing. You know, it's free isn't free. It's all the hidden costs, and I think that there's a reason that everyone who's on this panel, including yourself, has been in this business for as long as we have. It's because we can provide something that creates real value, and that's worth paying for. And I think the underlying message there is, it is worth it to spend money if you're getting value from it, and it's going to save you time and create efficiencies and allow you to reach your objective for doing it in the first place.
Okay, great. Last but not least, Tony, what's your closing takeaway?
I think that really the important thing is really to think about what's important to you, right? Is it the value? Is it the cost? Is it timeliness? So I think it's really thinking about what are most important to you and really making that decision, because really in the end, no decision's a wrong decision, just a matter of what you want to spend.
Good. Well, I don't see any other questions that came in. Lauren, I'll kick it back to you if you had some closing words from the Avixa standpoint.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. This was a really great conversation today. I think you all had hit the nail on the head with your points. So final words today, this recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within 5 days. It typically is up closer to 3. So check back then. Your RU credits will be applied to your transcript within 5 to 7 business days as well. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at webinars@avixa.org, and we will certainly get you taken care of. Our next webinar in the series will happen on March 2nd, Social as Currency, Transforming Social Media to Social Selling on Premise. And then you can, of course, register for that free webinar on avixa.org under the training section. There will be a drop down that says webinars, and you can register there. And again, I will just say thank you to everyone that joined us today. We had a great time and look forward to seeing you next week.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you in March.